Hi everyone, I'm Jay here at Newton Community Farm on another episode of gardening at Newton. So today we are going to do part 2 of our cover cropping lesson of what to do and how to think about cover cropping for your home garden. So for those of you who have watched last week's episode about cover cropping, we did a whole lesson on cover cropping for the farm and certain principles and practices and ways to think about how a small scale farm would use cover cropping in their management of soil. And today we're going to be talking about more of your home garden's management of soil, incorporating cover crop. Or cover cropping. So the big thing about both lessons is really thinking about the quality of your soil. And when we think about the plants that we're growing and how we want to grow it, all of that comes to how good our soil was from the beginning. So if you're making these errors and you're not getting enough nutrients out of the soil during your growing season, sometimes it's just kind of too late. There's only certain things that you can do, and you're really starting thinking about how to improve your soil for next season. So when you're thinking about improving your soil for next season, this is where cover cropping really comes into play. So what you really want to do is think about what are your goals with cover cropping in your home garden. And your goals really want to depend on how your soil is currently doing and what you want it to do for the future. So for the improvement of the soil, if you need to add nitrogen, that's one method that you can start thinking about. Or if you want to think about how to not do soil erosion, then that's another way to think about what you need to what you need to do. And then if your soil is actually doing great and you don't need to kind of worry about adding more nitrogen or worry about soil erosion, then we'll be talking about a third and fourth strategy that you can be kind of working on for your soil management. So the first thing that we're going to do is kind of show you kind of an example of one of our garden beds here at Newton Community Farm. And we grow a number of things here on this bed throughout the season. It's a pretty great bed. We have a couple flowers growing. We just had some radishes here. We have some great parsley that we've been able to harvest pretty much for our entire season. And what I'm doing is I'm really looking to see kind of what's here now. It's mid-September. Are we going to be planting anything new? What can still continue to be here? But then thinking about the future of specifically this bed and how we're going to be kind of working on it. So as I mentioned earlier, the two main goals that many home gardeners have is, do I need to fix more nitrogen into my soil, or do I need to worry about some sort of soil erosion? And when I talk about soil erosion, that's when I sort of mean that your soil can kind of washed away, or some of your topsoil is missing because of heavy rains or just wind, and there's nothing really sort of covering it, or hasn't been covering it for a long time. So that's how soil erosion kind of goal setting looks into play, as well as your nitrogen looking strategy. So for nitrogen, it's very crucial for all our plants to grow to have a significant amount of nitrogen to have healthy plants. And you'll know that you have nitrogen deficiency in your soil if your leaves are turning yellow, you're not actually getting fruit out of your veggies, or nothing's actually just growing in your garden bed. So that's how. Those are three major ways that you could be missing nitrogen. And so when you're thinking then about adding nitrogen into your soil, you're really wanting to start thinking about what are some of the legumes out there that I could be sort of planting to get that nitrogen out of the air and start fixating it into the soil. So so this is an example of a legume. So this is our field peas. I'll give you like an example there. So field peas, these will really kind of like bush out. They'll be able to kind of fixate all of that nitrogen that's out there for us to breathe and put that into the soil. So when you're thinking about your cover crops, there's really nothing more to do than really just kind of think about where you're going to be planting, and then simply just kind of add the seeds to the soil here. And obviously this is kind of loose-ish soil, so if I'm doing it by hand, I could just kind of just get it into the soil there. So that's just like one way to do it. Here, if you have your rake, right? So after you put your seeds or your cover crop seeds in the soil, you can simply just take your rake. It's fairly simple, thinking about whatever cover crop you're using. And then, for example, this is oats. So oats are another cover crop that is used primarily for soil erosion. So what oats are able to do is really get those roots into the soil enough where it's keeping everything intact for you. So again, similar to our peas example, all you're going to be doing is really putting it into your hand and just broadcasting it into your soil. And either you can just take your hand if it's a small enough garden bed and just put it in there, or take your rake and get it going. If it's about to rain, then you can use Mother Nature to help you out. And one of the great things about cover cropping is when the plant actually grows and winter is upon us and it snows, you're really creating this sort of protective layer between the snow and the soil. So it becomes a sort of like thermalized sort of like blanket of protection. So things aren't necessarily compacted into the soil over the winter if it was just barren. And also keep in mind is that every cover crop will have its own strategy of whenever it is that it's going to terminate its life. So when we planted oats, one of the things that oats would be able to do is winter kill. So like winter kill means that when you time your planting for your cover crops, like now would be a good time to start thinking about your cover crops, because it will get into the soil enough before the first frost, and you want to check your area about when your first frost date is going to come, and then it holds down its roots, and then winter comes, and then by the time spring comes into season, a lot of that cover crop is already going to be sort of gone, and you don't have to necessarily worry about it. With things like legumes, it's definitely going to like enrich the soil. And again, it's that strategy of adding nitrogen into the soil. and nitrogen is being fixed into the soil before pollination. So when the cover crops are starting to flower and start to pollinate, it's no longer putting that nitrogen back into the soil, and it's going to use its own nitrogen and use it for its seeds and its pollination. So this is where you want to mow your cover crops. You want to be able to till it back into the soil. So all that power that the plant was able to gain over the course of the winter, it's now being directly implanted back into the soil with all of that nitrogen for the things that you're looking to grow. Now the sort of trouble with cover crops that many people that are new to using cover crops don't necessarily realize is that if you're not managing your beds and you're letting those cover crops go to seed, then it's just going to become another weed that you're going to have to like worry about. And especially if your cover crops are like a grass and that grass gets like really high, you're going to be spending a lot of time simply just ripping that cover crop out, so you actually have space then to grow whatever it is that you're looking to grow in your garden. So thinking about, you know, how and where and when your cover crops are going to be turned into your soil is part of your just garden management and your soil management. Now for many of us who, you know, our gardens are doing well, and we don't necessarily have to worry about our cover crops, you know, one of the things that, you know, we do here on the farm is simply just make sure that our beds and where we're going to be planting is covered. So, you know, here we have leaf mulch that is just simply protecting our soil underneath to make sure that, you know, the moisture stays nice and wet, and we're not losing any of our topsoil on the health of the soil that we're already planting. Another thing to consider is when you are finished with your cover crop, with your planting, you can just leave the plant matter directly into the soil and just let it decay and go back into it. So at least there's some sort of like covering sort of along the way, and, you know, insects like caterpillars would come in and sort of hide behind like the leaves, and, you know, obviously that's where our great butterflies will come in later on in the season. So in summary, you know, again, like when you're thinking about your home cover cropping, you want to think about what your goals are. So is your goal to increase your nitrogen, and how you know that you need to increase your nitrogen is looking at how well your plants did that season. So were you getting a lot of yellow leaves? Were you not getting a lot of fruit? Was nothing growing? So these are the signs that, you know, you need to fix more nitrogen into that. So once again, you want to think about planting some sort of like legume that can then pull the nitrogen out of the air into the soil. Are you losing your topsoil because of heavy rains, because of wind, because of storms? So there you want to think about planting something like oats that help prevent soil erosion. Or did you have a great and a healthy garden, and all you really need to do is just protect the soil that was already there? So that's when you want to start thinking about covering either with straw or mulch or leaf, you know, just to create some sort of like barrier there to protect the soil for the winter. Or could you just leave whatever plant matter that you had in there to be just another added protection for the soil? So just give you kind of ideas and some examples of what you can do at home for your own cover cropping. So I hope you got something out of this video. We're always here on Wednesdays sharing these great tips around gardening and how to best improve your gardening tips. So take care and see you next week.